Hey guys, Yips here, coming out with another video, and this one's going to be about Warlocks in Mythic Plus. Now, I've done a lot of testing since the patch hit. I've tried a lot of different Mythic Plus builds, and I'll come to you guys today with a summary about all of the different builds, as well as talking about stats and legendaries for them. So, Warlock in Mythic Plus now is a lot more dynamic than it used to be. Before, it was kind of just you ran Sow the Seeds, Malefic Grasp, you casted Seed of Corruption on AoE, and you drained targets on 2 to 3 target cleave pulls, and your single target was fairly basic. Now, Warlock has changed quite a bit in Mythic Plus. Yes, you can still run this build, but there are plenty of other really viable ones that you can run that I'll talk about today. So, obviously with the change to Soul Flame, Malefic Grasp, the buff to our base dots, a new build that has appeared has been a really dot-heavy one. So the dot-heavy build that I've been running in Keystones ranging from level 10 to level 20 has been Writhe and Agony, Contagion, Phantom Singularity, and Soul Conduit. Now, this build kind of plays itself out. It's really, really strong, especially on Fortified between 3 and 5 target pulls. So if you're ever in a pug group on a reasonably high Keystone, this is definitely going to be the best build for you, I think. It does take a little bit of practice to get used to tracking your multi-dots, but in the end, it really pays off, and it does help you improve your skill as a player. So the idea behind this build is you want to get as many agonies out as you can, because agony is an extremely hard-hitting dot at 15 stacks, as well as casting UA on as many of those targets as you can. By spreading out your unstable afflictions and getting multiple agonies out, you can increase the damage of those agonies by 15%, and you also don't sacrifice single target. I highly don't recommend you guys take Absolute Corruption for this build, as you lose a lot of single target if you don't pick Contagion. The way that you're going to AoE with this build comes from the talent of Phantom Singularity. It's good on 2 targets, it's good on 1 target, it's good on 10 targets. This is kind of like your reasoning to say, hey, I'm going to run this build, my 2 to 6 target damage is going to be amazing for my dots, but if it's anything higher than that, I can use Phantom Singularity to AoE that down. And then Soul Conduit is nice for the added shard generation. So I'm going to show you guys how this build plays, and then talk a little bit about the gearing for it, as well as the legendaries that you're going to use. So it plays itself pretty well. What you're going to do is precast Seed of Corruption as to apply Corruption to all of your targets, get your agonies out, cast Phantom Singularity, and then try to spread out your UAs the best that you can. So you cast Seed of Corruption like this, toss out your agonies, shove up your Phantom Singularity because you want it to be off cooldown as fast as possible, and then try to spread out your UAs as best as possible. You generally speaking don't want to dump more than 1 UA per target, as you'll probably run into shard problems if you try to do that. Even trying to maintain, you know, my UA on 4 targets, I'll be running out of shards, so I'll eventually only be able to do 2. But this is how you want to play the build. It's also really important to note that not only while maintaining all of these dots, when the mobs are dying, you want to make sure that you snipe them with a Drained Soul just to get that shard back when they do die, as that is a huge part of your shard generation with this build. So you can see here I'm just playing it out. Just maintain your dots. After the first Seed of Corruption, you don't really need to cast another one, and then just keep casting your UAs. You see I can do really, really sick damage here just by maintaining my dots on 4 targets, and Phantom Singularity's back up. We can pop that and go back in with another burst. So really, really nice build here. Really, really solid for overall DPS, and I've actually been doing better with this build in Mythic Plus than I had previously. Now, a couple important things to note about this build is 1 regarding stat weights and 2 regarding legendaries. So with regards to stats, in Mythic Plus, it is super, super important to realize that your pulls are going to be a lot shorter than a normal raid encounter. So when you go on a trash pull, generally speaking, a 4 target trash pull won't take as long as it takes you to kill Corrosis. Now what this does is it jacks up the value of haste. Okay, so when I sim myself on a short pull on about 4 target cleave, haste is my #1 stat by a mile, like a country mile. Like all it wants me to get is haste and a little bit of mastery and a little bit of crit. So the way that I've been doing Mythic Plus is I've been running these stat lines. I've been running 24% haste with Erratic Metronome, so often my haste is even higher than that, paired with Suffuse. What this lets me do is most pulls with Erratic Metronome, on average, I'll be around 27 to 30% haste, and then when I proc Suffuse, I'll shoot up to close to 50%. This just allows me to amplify my dots getting out on the targets a little bit faster, and since I can get my dots out faster and spend all my resources, by the time the trash has died, I would have already had all my damage output. So if you find you're struggling with this build, it might be because you don't have enough haste. So I'm just going to show you guys here like the improvement, what haste does. So I can start by precasting my seed, but look how fast that I'm able to get all of my dots out here, especially with the Suffuse proc. It's super, super quick to do, and by the time, you know, a couple seconds has passed, I'm already ramped up over 2 million DPS, right? So really, really important to make sure that you guys get a crap load of haste. It's super, super important to run this build in Mythic Plus. You see here my haste is just off the charts. I'm also running very low mastery. That's also very important to note. Not saying that having no mastery is bad, but you know, it's not as important of a stat. Now, mastery does go up on 2 target and it does go up on single target. So of course I have a single target build for the dungeon that has a lot more mastery to it. But for most trash pulls, I'm going to be running this extremely high haste, extremely high crit build in order to maximize my damage on short pulls. So a little quick talk about legendaries before I move on to the next build. Right now, I am using the Master Harvester with Sifu's Secret. Sifu's, I feel like the explanation is kind of obvious. I use it for the haste proc. The stats on it are great. It's like a bloodlust every single pull. Don't need to talk too much about that. But the Master Harvester, you guys see how many shards I'm spending with this build, and in Mythic Plus it's even more because I'm able to drain targets that get low for increased damage. So since every shard that I spend has a 9% chance to grant Soul Harvest, I'm spending so many shards that almost every pull this thing procs, and getting a 20% damage boost on 4 targets as a warlock is nuts. So it's a super powerful legendary. I've been trying it out. I really like it. Another extremely viable option is obviously going to be the helmet. So if you want to, you can run Sifu's and Helm. You could even change out Sifu's for Helm and the chest. That's another really good legendary combination. Obviously, what the helmet does for you here is increases the agony damage as well as gives you additional shards. If you don't have that, you can use the bracers. So these are the legendary setups that I recommend. Any sort of combination between the helmet, the chest piece, the bracers, and Sifu's will really be a true powerhouse for you in this thing. A quick note about the bracers. It's really, really important with the bracers that you make sure to spread out your UAs in order to maximize the Seratin buff. So you see here, I get all my dots out, I pop my Phantom Singularity. Super important that you spend your time casting UAs on multiple targets in order to get that multiple modifier out there in order to increase your damage with that Seratins, okay? Very, very, very important. So these are the builds that this is the legendaries and the stats that I've found work best with this build for Mythic Plus, and now I'm going to move on to some other ones. So this has been the dot build. Another viable build is obviously the old build, the Malefic Grasp, the Sow the Seeds, the Soul Conduit build. I'll go sow the seeds in just a second. Now, the reason that you're going to want to run the Malefic Grasp and Sow the Seeds build is if you want a little more single target in the dungeon and the dungeon's doing a lot of AoE pulls. So a good example of like this is when you're spamming 9 keys on an easy week and your tank is pulling the entire instance. This build is extremely good because you have good single target for the boss from Malefic Grasp, but you also have some nice burst AoE with Sow the Seeds. I can't see too many situations on higher keystones where you're going to be running this build because generally speaking, once you get on high level keystones, your tank can't pull the entire instance, therefore you can't have huge burst AoE and it's not as important. But just, you know, to iterate how you play this build on multiple targets, you're going to be casting Seed here, shoving out your UAs like this, and then you're just going to, or agonies like this, and then you're just going to be spamming Seed of Corruption once they pop, just like this. So just spam Seed. That's all you do for AoE, and then for single target, it's the same as the basic Malefic Grasp single target build. Just put your 2 dots up, cast 2 UAs, reap, and drain. This build is good for dungeons where you can pull a lot of mobs. So for example, if you're spamming Maw Souls and your tank pulls the entire thing, this will be a very good build for that, because then you'll have good boss damage and good AoE, but overall this build kind of is a niche one now, and I don't think is truly as powerful as the dot build. For legendaries with this build, the only one I don't recommend that you used from the last set that I was talking about is going to be the bracers. I recommend you use Sifu's or the helmet over that. The harvester is still very good for it, but I think Seratins lose a lot of value with this build as you're no longer trying to spread your agonies or UAs out everywhere. The last build I'm going to talk about is for lower level keystones that you might be working on. I think one of the best builds for lower level keystones is going to be the Haunt, Contagion, Phantom Singularity build. This build just gives you a lot of power up front compared to the other builds. It allows you to do a lot of single target damage very quickly, but doesn't do much else. So in lower level Mythic Pluses, trash just dies so fast that you really just need to get a quick burst off. So the way you're going to play this is you can put your dots on the target, cast a UA, cast Haunt, and then just shove a bunch of UAs into it. What this allows you to do is to kind of burst the mob over the course of, 5 seconds, And then by the time that you've killed the mob, generally speaking, your haunt wouldn't have been worn off, so you get the cooldown reset, and then you can go and put that on the next trash mob and burst him down. Good legendaries with this build are going to be the helmet, the belt, the Master Harvester, Safuz again. I think Safuz is truly the best legendary in Mythic Plus, and generally speaking, with this build and the last build that I talked about, you're going to want it to be running more mastery and haste than crit. So this has been a generic guide for Mythic Plus. I hope you guys liked it. I hope it gives you a little bit of insight towards what you should be playing in the future. And yeah, I'll see you guys in the next video. Have a good one.